Hi, I'm Joni Patrie, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to go over the 2024 presidential elections in detail. So not only am I going to give you my prediction for the elections, also I'm going to give you my predictions on what happens after the election, because it's just as important as what happens at the election. There is so much that is going to come down. You are going to want to listen to this entire video, because even though I may make a prediction you don't want to hear, you're going to want to hear the whole video. So what I'm about to say is I am pretty confident about the results of this election. I've been doing this for a long time, and I am basing this on astrology. And as you all know, I do Vedic astrology, which uses the sidereal system, which I feel is more accurate. Okay, so we're going to be looking at what exactly is happening in both candidates' charts, as well as looking at Election Day, November 5th, as well as looking at Inauguration Day, because there could be a big shift. And you'll want to see what I have to say. So before I proceed, I know a lot of you, 50% of the U.S. thinks one way, opposite of the other way. So we have a huge divide going on, more than ever before. And what I want to say is I love what the talk show host many years ago, Dick Cavett, said. I always remember this because it's so true. He said, it takes a great person to hear what they don't want to hear. And so some of you, please listen in and hear me out. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of these charts together, and I will give you my assertion of what will happen. So before I go there, I want to remind everyone to sign up for my free newsletter, where you will get all of my predictions delivered to your email address every week. And while you go to my website to sign up, which is galacticcenter.org, don't forget to check out my Patreon page. If you want to be part of my community, where we talk about all these things in much greater detail than I can here, sign up, become part of our community. So you can find that on galacticcenter.org. And don't forget my Galactic Planner. It is an amazing planner where you will get your chart calculated, all of your aspects to your personal chart. And every day you can see what's going on, live and be guided by the stars. And so go to galacticplanner.com and you can get my planner and your chart. And every day you will know through the guidance of the stars what day is best to do whatever you have planned. So let me continue on, and we are going to get down to business, because this is really important. As we all feel, this is important. And one thing I want to say, both presidential candidates keep saying democracy. This is a threat to democracy if the other guy gets it. And so I had to Google exactly what democracy means. And I found it really interesting that democracy is what the people want. Democracy is when you have a country, a nation that the people get to choose. They get to vote. That's democratic. That's a democracy. So whatever the people choose, I think we need to go with, because that is what democracy is all about. So let me start with looking at the chart of Kamala Harris. So putting up Kamala Harris, let me scoot over here so we can start looking at the charts. And even if you don't know astrology, bear with us, because you're going to learn something. All right. So looking at Kamala Harris's chart, the thing that I always can't help but notice right away is the fact that her ascendant, which is the rising sign, the ascendant is the personal point of who you are when you entered into this world. And her ascendant has Rahu, which is the north node of the moon, exactly on the ascendant. This is pretty rare, okay? But what does that mean? It is so significant, especially with what she is going through and what her life's been all about. It's that she has a certain destiny. Rahu is our destiny. It's our future. It's something that we came here with, the destiny that we couldn't avoid no matter what. So her life is really a destiny. Everything about her life, she didn't get to choose it. It was almost like chosen for her. Now, of course, I believe all of this is because of the past lives, things of that nature. But she is here with a certain destiny that must be fulfilled. And here it is. I mean, she is running for president of the most powerful country in the world. What a destiny is that? So people with this, their life, no matter what they do, things are going to happen pretty much to and for them. It's just the way it is. Now, another thing that I think is so significant about her chart is the fact that she was born under a perfect full moon. And a full moon sheds light. It brings light. So there's a certain awareness that she possesses. She sees the big picture. She has to with the full moon. And the way her life has been directed, she sees a lot. She knows a lot. Now, another thing is when we look over where Mars is, Mars sits in her second house of her voice. And the second house is money. And absolutely, she's done incredibly well for herself. But if you'll notice, Mars sits in the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is the most sensitive sign of the zodiac, but Mars is debilitated in Cancer. So it is weakened. But of course, all the other astrologers always point out, which is a fact, that the moon sits in Aries while Mars sits in Cancer. And you see, Aries rules Mars, but Mars rules Cancer. Therefore, there is an exchange of signs, which means this debilitation is lifted. So she has. But I will say this, when you have debilitated planets, and a debilitated planet simply means that planet is weakened and it's not strong. So it causes problems. And it's in the second house of her speech. And yes, she has had issues with her speech. A lot of people disagree with me there, but a debilitated planet indicates this. But the fact that the moon does an exchange with it means she overcomes it. But it starts out with an issue. Now, the other aspect that's very, very important in her chart is where Venus sits. Venus sits in the third house of communications, and it's in Leo. But her sun is in Libra. Another exchange of signs, because Venus rules Libra and the sun rules Leo. And this empowers a debilitated sun. But it starts out where she has insecurity. A debilitated sun indicates insecurity, but it's something that's overcome. So you can see she's got a very, very interesting and powerful chart. But let's talk about these elections that are coming up, because this is where we're going to look at her dasha as well as her transits. Now, the transits are simply where the planets are in the heavens at certain times. They're constantly transiting, they're constantly moving. And when they move to aspect, conjunct, or oppose certain planets in a person's chart, events happen. So we're going to plug in November 5th. where are the planets relative to her chart? And plugging that in, Jupiter, which is the planet that gives opportunities, expansion, and really good things in life, Jupiter is the planet that we look for when we're looking for somebody to win something. As well as Rahu. Rahu will give, but with a price. So we're going to plug both those planets in. And Saturn is the planet that takes away. It's restriction. It can deal with losses. So putting Jupiter in, Jupiter on the day. Now let's put up the chart for November 5th, where all the planets are going to be on that day. So looking at that, we have Jupiter on that day. It's going to be at 25 degrees of Taurus. And when we put it in her chart, it's in her 12th house. The 12th house is the house of closure, endings, loss. But if we look at it from her moon, it sits in her 3rd house, which is about communications and information. But it's not aspecting, well, it would be aspecting from her natal moon, the 10th house. That's the only plus I see. But Jupiter in the 12th house does not indicate a win. I mean, but if you look at it from the moon, yes, Jupiter's in the 2nd house, counting from the moon, and it is aspecting the 10th house. Got to look at it from every angle, right? So Jupiter doesn't do anything spectacular in her chart. Let me put it that way. But Rahu, which is in Pisces right now, does sit in her 10th house. And this brings her up to the public. And yes, she's running for president. Of course, she's got to have something good in her chart. Rahu in the 10th house. Remember I said Rahu gives, but with a price. So it brings her up. Makes her well known, makes her incredibly famous. But is it a good thing? We don't know with Rahu. Rahu is a wild card, but it can give. So it's in her 10th house, so I can't take that away. But Saturn, let's talk about where Saturn is on election day. Saturn's going to be stationing, meaning it's practically standing still, because in November it is going to turn direct. So it stands still while it's in its phase from moving from retrograde to direct. It's at 18 degrees of Aquarius, and it is opposing her Venus-Pluto conjunction. By the way, people with the Pluto-Venus conjunction, which she has very tight in her chart, will deal with issues around betrayal. And usually they're in relationship. But this is where Saturn is aspecting her Venus. And as Saturn moves forward through November and December, it will exactly oppose her Venus and her Pluto. And Saturn-Pluto is very difficult. So I'm not seeing Saturn help at all here. And to look at where transiting Mars is, now that's an interesting thing, because Mars will be 6 degrees of Cancer. So it is in her 2nd house, and it is in a square almost exactly to her Sun and her Moon, which sit at 4 degrees. So Mars sits at the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, which is not good, especially for Gemini rising. Mars is a first-rate malefic for a chart. So Mars is going to be going back and forth too between that degree mark. And Mars doesn't help her out either. Okay, so now let's pull up Donald Trump's chart. Let's replace his with Kamala's, and let's go over all the same indications. So we'll come back to hers. But Donald Trump looking at where transiting Jupiter is in his chart, and we've gone over Trump's chart before, by the way, just looking at Donald Trump's chart, he has Sun, Rahu, Uranus, all in the 10th house. Now, he is a Leo rising, which the Sun rules Leo. So his ascendant ruling planet of his chart goes to the 10th house, which is work and career. And it is with Rahu, which expands it and makes it extreme. Another interesting factor that Trump has is the Kalasarpa Yoga. And what that is if you'll notice, all the planets sit on one side of the chart. And they are the ones that are with Rahu and Ketu. They still create this yoga, such as all the planets are contained within Rahu and Ketu. And what that actually means is a certain destiny, of course, but it means major highs and major lows in his life. And I have told everyone, and this is a fact, when people have this Kalasarpa Yoga in their chart, their life has extremes that if they tell someone about what they've gone through in their life, people wouldn't believe them because it's so extreme. And on top of that, whenever somebody with this yoga goes into a low period, which they do, remember it's highs and lows, they usually rise to a much higher position than before. And you can definitely say this about Trump. I mean, he was at a high, went through bankruptcy, went to the bottom, rose up again, never thought he'd run for president again, and here we have it again. So that's the extremes of the Kalasarpa Yoga. And furthermore, looking at Trump's chart, his Jupiter sits in the second house. Jupiter's wealth and money. Second house is money. So he's a very wealthy man. Not only that, if you look up his chart, Jupiter is actually stationary. And what that means is in the process of it going retrograde or direct, it's at that point when it's standing still. Whenever a planet is stationary, it becomes one of the most powerful planets in the chart. And you got to admit, he's made a lot of money. And that's the stationary Jupiter in the second house of money. So another thing that's very interesting about Trump's chart is he was born at a full moon. But his full moon is actually a lunar eclipse, which is another extreme. Eclipses represent extremes in life. And with the sun in the 10th and the moon in the 4th, the 10th house is your career, your reputation. And yes, he's been viewed as extremely egotistical. That's the sun Rahu. And Uranus is unpredictable. But the moon, being with Ketu in the 4th house, he is more insightful than you know. He is intuitive. And not only that, let me just say, his moon in Jesta gives him great power and extreme jealousy too towards him. Yes, it does. So all of this, when you are in his position, of course, these kind of things are going to come at you. But let me just say, this chart represents extremes in power because the 4th house in astrology is said to be the seat of power. His moon's there. Now, very complicated because his Saturn, Venus in the 12th house represent difficulties and loss. And we're going to get to that. But getting to election day, I wanted this to be a very complete video so you guys can go back and see once the elections have come about what I'm talking about as well. So what I'm about to do is plug in Jupiter. Jupiter on that day is 25 degrees of Taurus. It is approaching his sun, and Rahu sits almost exactly on his Uranus, which means a sudden shift in change. And it is in a perfect trine to his natal stationary Jupiter in the second house. Jupiter is aspecting the Sun, the Moon by opposition, Rahu, Uranus, and natal Jupiter. And tightly, I might add. This all by itself will give a win. But there's other things in here that even add to the picture. Transiting Uranus on this day will be 1 degree of Taurus. Look at where his MC is. The MC is the midheaven, the highest point in the chart, which means a sudden, unexpected shift and gain. This is like amazing. And actually, Uranus was there at the time that he was almost assassinated. So there is a lot to come with all of this, because Uranus is sudden, unexpected events. So plugging in Saturn at 18 degrees of Aquarius, it is not aspecting anything from opposition. Yes, you could say his Mars ascendant. It's a wide orb. They're not there. And Saturn is, when it moves up, it will start to aspect his moon. It will start to square it. This will be sometime in around February, okay? But when it does, the good news is Jupiter's aspecting that position, so it is not going to be as dangerous as it could be, okay? But there is danger, if you've seen my other reads on his chart, of what's to come, especially next, I'm going to say March through June, but most critical times, I will say, will be April through May. Okay, but moving back to where Mars is going to be 6 degrees of Cancer. So it's going to be in his 12th house. He must be careful of hidden agendas and enemies. That's the 12th house. But Mars will have already crossed over his Saturn-Venus. So that aspect's already occurred about a week or two before the elections. So there will be some hits and difficulties that happen then. But the most important thing is his dasha. His dasha, he just shifted into Venus's subcycle. That happened around September 27th. And with that, he's in Jupiter-Venus. And I thought, well, Venus is in the 12th house. It may not be all that good. But the way that it works is whenever you're in a dasha, those transiting planets play out more powerfully. And we'll go back to Kamala's and look at that as well. But Venus, on the day of the election, is 29 degrees of Scorpio, right exactly opposing his Sun in the 10th house of career. Remember, Jupiter and Venus are the natural benefics that give opportunities and good things. So Venus is within a degree of his natal moon and exactly opposed his natal Sun. So Venus aspects the moon, the Sun, while Jupiter aspects the Sun and the moon. And he's in Jupiter-Venus's cycle. I have never seen anything like this. I've never been more confident about making a prediction. He will win this election based on that. Will he be able to keep the win? That's the next question. But going back to Kamala Harris's chart, she is right now in the dasha of Rahu Venus. Now, Rahu, as I said, is in her 10th house, which has given her the opportunity to run for president. But with transiting Venus being in her 6th house, that struggles. But don't forget, the very next day, Venus will move into Sagittarius, which will move right onto her Ketu in her 7th house. And when you talk about elections, the 7th house deals with the opponent, and Venus being there makes it strong for the opponent. That was another thing. But going back to this, her Venus is being aspected by Saturn, and she is in, so the transit of the Dasha ruling planet is important, as well as the natal position of the Dasha ruling planets. So overall, her chart doesn't stand up to Donald Trump's during the election day at all. But what I wanted to get at is that let's pull up the chart for Inauguration Day. And one more thing I wanted to add about the election chart. If you will notice, looking at November 5th, Mars and Pluto are within a degree of an exact opposition. That represents great violence breaking out. And what's going to be happening by around December 6th or 7th is when Mars will turn retrograde. And it's going to turn retrograde around 11-12 degrees of Cancer. And looking at that, all hell is going to break loose. Because what is going to happen, looking at Inauguration Day, they are going to try to take the presidency away from Trump. They're gonna come up with the January 6th thing, probably. That's my guess. But something big. And as they do this, all those voters for Trump will become so enraged, the whole country will be a January 6th. You will see, and like I've been saying throughout all of this time, think about this. That eclipse that happened in April, there was an X in the United States, right in the center of the United States, as a matter of fact, over Texas. This represents a big split. And there was an amazing comet that crossed over at the time of that solar eclipse, total solar eclipse in April. Comets are always signs for something. And what is even more interesting is another comet crossed over the eclipse that just happened in October 2nd. Another comet was visible in the sky. This indicates an enormous, huge change that is coming, and it is coming for the world. But the United States is at the culprit of all of this. And if you thought that the Civil War was a big deal, people are going to be enraged because everyone's going to be using the word democracy. We will see. But let me pull up the inauguration, because this is what I find is so interesting. Looking at this inauguration chart, which it always happens January 20th, so I'm looking at 2025, we have Pluto almost exactly conjunct the Sun. Pluto is major transformation and change. And as we are looking at the inauguration chart, it usually starts at noon. So I plugged in noon. So this always puts the Sun in the 10th house. And the 10th house is the government. The 10th house is the leadership, and the Sun is the president. So I find that so interesting that the inauguration chart always has the Sun, president, in the 10th house of government, so inaugurating a president. But Pluto sits on top of the sun, and Pluto is the planet of major change and transformation. And that is what's about to happen in the United States over the presidential leader. Now, Mars is still opposed Pluto and the sun. It sits at 0 degrees of Cancer on that day. And if you'll notice, the moon is 24 degrees of Virgo. I find that astounding, because if you go back and look at the United States chart that I use, which I'll be putting up in future videos, but Saturn is at 24 degrees in the 10th house of the United States chart, 1776, July 4th. Saturn sits at 24 degrees of Virgo. Notice the moon being here in this chart, 24 degrees of Virgo. So in the United States chart, Saturn in the 10th house of government represents the government. And the moon being here means big changes in the government. Fluctuations, big things are happening. The moon moves pretty fast, but on the time that inauguration starts, it is at that degree, 24 Virgo. But here is the most important aspect that I think of all, and that is when I put up the chart of Donald Trump. Notice Donald Trump go to his 12th house where his natal Saturn sit. They're at 0 degrees Cancer. Right, we're transiting Mars. Mars deals with violence, anger, war. Sits on Saturn. So, will he be inaugurated? Will it be postponed? Will they cancel him out from being the president? This could be with Mars being on his natal Saturn in the 12th house of loss. And then Mars is going to cross over as Venus in the next day. But it's really there on top of both Saturn and Venus. And Venus rules his 10th house of his work, his career. And by the way, that was something I left out also when Venus was aspecting his 10th house on election day. Venus is aspecting the 10th house, which rules his career, Taurus. Venus rules Taurus. When a planet aspects a house that it rules, it empowers that house for what it's good for. What I'm trying to say, that's further indication that he will win the presidency. But here is a major concern, because if the government takes it away from him, we're going to have violence break out like never before. So I hear of all these psychics around the world saying, oh, it's going to be crazy times. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. Here is why. We can see the exact details with the astrology. Astrology is a science and it works. So we can see what's going on. And what's going to be happening further on down the road is when Mars stations to go direct, it's going to fall back into the sign of Gemini. And when we look at the United States chart, let's put up the chart of the United States. Putting it up, like I said before, Saturn sits right there where the moon is on inauguration day at 24 degrees of Virgo. But most importantly, notice where the sun is in that chart. And the sun represents the president in a chart when you're talking about countries. And Mars is going to station to go direct. When it stands still, remember I said it's going to station to go retrograde December 6th and 7th. Cancer at 11, 12 degrees of Cancer. But then it's going to go retrograde all the way back into Gemini, and it's going to stop to turn direct around the 23rd of January, no, February, excuse me. February around the 23rd, 24th, Mars will station to move direct at 22 degrees of Gemini. And that is the Sun in the United States chart. So it is not over after the elections. It is not over after inauguration, if they will inaugurate somebody January 20th. Looks very difficult. And I even pulled up the inauguration chart for Kamala's chart. And looking at that, Saturn is going to be opposing her Venus-Pluto. As a matter of fact, on that day, Saturn is exactly opposed her Pluto. And that's not good either. Could it just be that inauguration's called off for a while? Or whoever does get inaugurated is looking at a very dire position to be president. Something huge is happening. Furthermore, I want to point out something down the road. After all of this turbulence, if we still have a president, if we still have Trump as president, here is what I do see. If you will notice, he has his, in the 12th house, his Saturn sits there at 0 degrees of Cancer and his Venus at 2 degrees. Well, moving towards, this is really important, moving towards October of 2025, we're going to have Jupiter enter into Cancer. Briefly, it enters into Cancer, but it stops and it stations at 0 degrees of Cancer. This is huge. All that happened to him, retribution, everything, prison, whatever, it's going to come undone when Jupiter stations on his Saturn. Here's what I predict. By this time of October of 2025, when Jupiter stations at 0 degrees of Cancer, and it will be there from October through the entire month of November and part of December of 2025, he is going to, if he makes it past the springtime, he is going to reveal all the corruption, all the past, everything that he's been talking about. Remember how he keeps saying he's going to drain the swamp? Well, he's not going to let up at all, because this is a healing for the country. This is a healing for the world. This is where the truth will come out, because it's going to be in his 12th house of finality, finishing what he started. Now, if this upsets you, here's what I will say. Whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, here's what I've always said. He is the catalyst for change. Has nothing truly to do with him. And all these other characters involved will bring down the truth about what has been going on in the government and the governments around the world. And you know what that's going to do? It's going to have a beautiful clearing, and it's going to be a much better world. You will see. No matter what side you are on politically, I think Democrat, Republican, it's not going to matter at this point. It's just going to be that we're all in this together. We're all humanity, and we all want the truth. We don't like being lied to. We want the truth, and we want the world to be a better place. And no matter what we think or feel, this is what's coming. This will heal. And you know what else? I think the world's going to be so much more prosperous. Yes, we're going to go through a dire time during all of this incredible chaos. So many things have to happen. So many things have to happen in order for this clearing to happen. And it looks like a terrible situation. But it is all part of what's necessary to occur to heal this beautiful planet Earth. And we will come together after that. That is a promise. When Jupiter goes and stays in Cancer in 2026, we will have a prosperous, healing society. And all of this division will stop. You'll see. So that is my prediction. Wow. I hope you stuck it through to the end, even though you might have heard some things you didn't want to hear. But I felt the need to really lay it all out so you could better understand, why is this all happening? Because it needs to clear the air and heal and make this world a better place for all of us, and to get rid of all of our judgments and what we feel about political candidates. It's been insane. And all media promoted, the media controls our minds. So we're going to see all of this is going to come undone. So with that, I hope that even though it's maybe bad or good news, trust me, this is all good news that's going to happen in the end. It's like it ends. It doesn't end, but it's coming to a good healing and result. And that's where we're going to be. So bless everyone out there and hang in there. Always connect to your divine spirit. Don't get enraged or angry or upset. Let the universe do its job and heal our planet. So with that, I think I'll close. Remember, if you would like more information on me, you can go to my website, galacticcenter.org. And remember to sign up for my free newsletter and become part of our Patreon community, as well as, if this interests you to learn Vedic astrology, I have an online university you can learn to be an astrologer. So go to universityofvedicastrology.com, become my student, as well as don't forget the Galactic Planner. Be prepared every day for your own personal life, what's in store for you. Go to galacticplanner.com. Thank you.